take these 4 logic pieces. And this is the requirements for a high-performing PM system to ensure no non-expert gets on your project. 1, you have to make sure that if any vendor comes to you, you require them to look ahead and see into the future. They have to be able to tell you what's going to happen in the future. 2, they have to know how to minimize risks they don't control. They have to take all accountability for their technical expertise. 3, vendors must be able to simplify it for you. It's not good enough that they tell you, yes, I'm an expert at this and I know exactly what to do. They have to relay their plan, relay why it is that they need their product to you in a simple way that you don't have to think about it. Everybody can see it. Now with that, to make it simple, they have to measure themselves. Not in terms of technical details, but in terms of metrics, performance metrics, simple metrics. And then of course, when you have an expert, they're not going to want you to tell them what to do, how to do, and when to do it. That's the best way to scare an expert away. Why? Because when an expert sees this going on in an organization, all they see is waste. All they see is a headache, and they will run because experts don't want to waste their time. Usually, they'll come in as a marketing person, tell you exactly how it's done, and then they'll leave because they don't want to spend any time with an organization that's going to waste their time. So these are the requirements for a high-performing system. Now let's go over Agile here. Agile is great because it's very flexible. That's why it was created, for the flexibility. It was created to make sure you bring all the experts on board. The issue with it, though, is it didn't require anyone to look ahead. It increased collaboration, increased the talking, increased the complexity on projects. And so there was a trade-off here. Some of the guidelines of Agile, it was iterative. You have short sprints. You're going on. You're learning from each. The only issue is when somebody's an expert, there's no learning that they need. They know exactly what to do. You know, I remember a project. I was helping a project management organization. They needed a new electronic file manager. So they had all these PDFs, all of their information on projects. They wanted a way to organize it better and to have a system, a database, where they could access their information better. They brought all these vendors in, these technology vendors. They all had great presentations, very flashy, looked amazing. But when we got down to it, I asked the vendor who was selected, what is going to be the difference between now and later? What is the advantages to the client? And of course they said, oh, you know, all these things, this is like so secure, all this stuff. When we got down to it, it wouldn't do anything for the client. It was just a new flashy system that they could put all their documents into a thing that looked nice. And it was just upgrading the graphics. What ended up happening is that project management organization looked at the $200,000 cost and they said, we no longer need this service. And they didn't even hire anyone. They saved themselves $200,000, had the same thing, right? When you don't look ahead, when you don't see the whole thing, then you can actually start going on here, learning these different things only to find out you really don't need a lot. And this is the issue. If we're looking this in terms of an event, you have the professional, they come in, you have the money and you have the man hours that you need and you have the time limit. But because no one's responsible for looking at the very end, knowing exactly what needs to be done, you start going through these sprints and you're completing requirements. But inevitably, by the time you get to the end of this, there's requirements left over because nobody was accountable for keeping it in a certain time frame with a certain budget. And when these requirements aren't met, who's responsible for this? Everyone worked together. Is it the buyer or the expert that needs to fork out the money? And this is a big issue here. So when we look at the Agile system, although it has a flexibility and it allows you to collaborate and get a lot of experts together, what we really want to do in a high-performing PM system, most of it is the exact opposite of the requirements of creating an environment that invites an expert into what you're doing. What ends up really happening is we have more price-based characteristics than best value characteristics, than high-performing characteristics. Now, I know I went really quickly. This might be a little shock to you. So make sure if you have any questions you're asking. If not, I'm going to now talk to you about the best value approach. And the reason being, and the reason why we've been doing this for the last 25, almost 30 years now, is because we saw the numbers. In every study that's being done in research effort, they're finding that project performance is low. It's very difficult to get a project on time, on budget, with what the client needs, and having the customer satisfied with what they receive. And you can see this in every industry. Every industry, they're having the same issues. Again, I put some of the requirements, what we're looking for. And this is kind of some of the results of the best value approach. Our sole purpose is to utilize expertise and then to let the expert do their job. But what we want to do is make sure they're accountable for what they do. Make sure that they can explain it, make sure they can measure it. These are the performance numbers of all the research we've been doing. And we've gone all over the world doing this with large and small organizations, public and private, it doesn't matter, because what we're dealing with is a humanistic issue. It's not an actual structure problem. I know many of you will ask, well, can you do this on top of another delivery or project management model? And yes, you can. Any model that's taking advantage of these 4 pieces of logic, you're just adhering to the natural laws of people, then you can actually integrate this in. Now, we actually have a model that we have found works best in implementing all of these pieces of logic and creating the right environment. So I'm going to quickly go over this. First, you have the preparation. We let the vendors know, look, you're going to be accountable. We're not going to give you a lot of information, and we want you to make things simple, and we want you to have metrics that can prove that you've done it before. So when you go into phase 2, the selection phase, this is when you have an RFP. Most RFPs, or most things where we go out and select vendors from, we don't give them a lot of technical information. In fact, most of the scope of works are within 1 page, even less. You're talking about multi-million-dollar projects, less than 1 page, because we're expecting the vendor to know all the details and what the client should get. Now, in selection, we're not asking for any technical details on their scope of work. In fact, the best value approach is a vendor-centric model. Since the expert's the only one who can minimize risk, we're going to require the expert and the vendors, one, to select themselves. And you might ask, well, how are we going to get the vendors to select themselves? We created a selection model where you cannot make a decision. The vendors, if they don't give you information that looks like this to let you know they are the best ones, everybody gets a 5 rating. A 5 rating means we don't know. Everybody's evaluated the same unless you can give us dominant information, performance metrics, showing us that what you're going to give us is better than anyone else. And it needs to stick out just like this. As you can see in the selection criteria, one of them is level of expertise. We want the vendors to give us a claim on something they can do. For example, we have the best project manager for this type of work, but we're not going to believe their claim. Then they need to give us performance information that shows us that this project manager is the best. They've worked 100 projects, similar size and scope as your project. 98% on time, on budget, and the client is 10 out of 10. They're extremely happy. Now that gives them a high rating. But they're supposed to give a claim and performance metrics. They're supposed to identify risk that they don't control. We don't care about technical risk because we assume they have it under control. All we want is that they understand the non-technical risks and how things that they don't control is going to be minimized. Now, we also want to utilize their expertise and their value added. Do they see anything on our project that would add tremendous value to us at no cost or minimal cost? Once we identify the highest ranking vendor, the highest performing vendor of the vendors giving us the information, then we bring that one vendor, the one expert, into clarification. In clarification, this is where the expert has to make it simple. They have to not only tell us what the scope of work will be, so the expert is creating the scope of work, but they have to explain it simply so all of the client stakeholders can understand it. They have to show us some metrics on exactly what they're doing. Metrics cause no discussion, meaning if I were to ask how many water bottles am I holding, there's no discussion on that. It's one, right? These are the type of metrics we're looking for. We want the expert to lay it all out. Now, to give you another view of this, this is how we want to measure a project. This is the metrics we're looking for from a vendor. We show them the client requirement. The client requirement is just what the current situation is. The client's showing you this is what we currently have in metrics. And the expert is telling you, don't worry, we've done it before, we've done a ton of these things, and you're going to get a better product, better service, better satisfaction than you received in anything else. More money back, more savings, more value. And then during the clarification, so we're in phase 3 still, they are going to pre-plan this entire project. Many people will say, oh no, a vendor can never know everything because we don't have all the information yet. We tell the vendors, if you need pieces of information that you don't have, guess. Use your expertise to predict and make assumptions on what's going to happen. Insufficient information, you don't know what a stakeholder is going to do, predict. Use your expertise to know exactly what's going to happen because they can see this without even thinking about it. They just know what's going to happen. Now, here's the thing. Once they lay out the entire plan, everyone's happy with it, that's when we sign the contract. And the contract is the vendor's plan. The vendor's identifying in their plan if they're wrong with their assumptions, if they're wrong with what people are going to do, what the impact is going to be on the project. So they let you know ahead of time in the contract, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. If this is wrong, then this is what we're going to do for you. It allows for the flexibility of changing the plan, but it still holds the expert accountable for having a vision from beginning to end on what's going to happen. And so what's going to happen here is when we get to phase 4 execution, the vendor is going to create this weekly risk report in the clarification. And this report, I'm going to show you some examples. It will track any deviations to their original plan all the way through the project. So at the end of this project, any deviations, it's going to clearly show why the deviation happened, what the impact was of it, and what ended up happening from that. So kind of to give you an idea of what should be in the vendor's clarification documents or plan. They should have all of these things. They should lay it out. The only thing the vendor does not create in the contract is the contract terms. The legal terms, that's the client. The client puts all of those in. Why? Because they need them. But the vendor and expert is making everything else, the entire plan, the scope of work. So this is an example of construction project. You can see these are the metrics they're tracking. Over budget, over time, customer satisfaction, who's causing the delays, who's causing the over budget. Their milestone schedule. They have a schedule. You can see they have the initial schedule that will never change. The actual schedule they're filling in as things happen. If there's any deviations, you can see what they're doing. They put a risk. And in this documentation of why this is a delay or why something happened here, you go to their risk tab and they actually explain to you, this is what we told you would happen. This is a deviation that actually did occur. This is what we did to resolve it. And this is what the impact was to the client in terms of cost and time. And this is how bad it was. They give you updates each week, non-technical updates on, hey, just to let you know, these are the main things we're looking at. These are the things that you might want to be looking at for the future in this project from the expert. And basically what you have here is, in the beginning, you have the expert becoming accountable by making their plan. You bring all the stakeholders in so everybody knows what the plan is. We put blindfolds on the stakeholders because they're not experts at this. During the project, you then have deviations, risks that occur, and the tracking of all the metrics. And then in the end, you have one simple place where if anybody wants to know why the project was delayed, why the project had an increase in cost, that there's one place that everyone can go to know exactly what happened. Now, let me give you some examples of where this was done and what had happened. First, in the Netherlands, they did one of their ministries, their infrastructure ministry, they're over all the shipping and transportation and also roads. It took them 12 years to get one project done, from procurement all the way to execution. So this minister said, in the next years, you have to complete so many projects in 3 years from beginning to end. They didn't know a way to do it, so they found the best value approach. And this is the result. In the time frame, instead of just completing 10, they actually finished 15 projects. And you can see the metrics. Took less time, took less effort from everybody involved. Even in the procurement, it took less effort from the vendors and the client. And when they actually looked at what happened, all deviations were caused by who? The client. Any expert vendor realizes the client is their biggest issue. This infrastructure billion-dollar project actually won the Supply Chain Management Award in the Netherlands. It was the first time one of the government agencies won this award. But you can see in the Netherlands now, they taught all their professionals this way of doing business, and now all their professionals are actually doing projects this way. A lot of people say, some industries, you can't predict the future. But they even did this on medical equipment that they had to build, meaning there was no such medical equipment like that in existence. They were actually hiring people to build what they needed. And so even new medical equipment, they required the vendor to have a full outlook from beginning to end. In the US, you can see all the people who have implemented this. In the state of Oklahoma, they did this on every type of service you can imagine. You can kind of see what they found out here. When they actually got done with the projects, you can start seeing the savings that they had. $30 million savings on $54 million spent. That is absolutely amazing. Simply by letting the expert come in, be accountable, and show them what they're going to do for them. Even on something like a light bulb project, meaning they're buying light bulbs and they're implementing and delivering light bulbs. It's amazing, a commodity, but they saved a lot of money on that even. Here's some of the types of things they did. Some are more complicated than others. And here's the conclusion. In following these basic 4 pieces of logic, using this best value approach, they're able to save so much money and time. But it allows for the flexibility that you need, right? You want the expert to look at the whole thing, beginning to end, but you want them to have flexibility for the risks and the issues that could come up that nobody could foretell. But you want them to be accountable. You want to know exactly at each point, what was the impact? How does it change the overall plan? Now with this, we've had an adjustment. When we first started out, it was only in procurement. But what we started figuring out is procurement is a client-centered type environment. We actually need to shift this to be a vendor-centric environment where the vendor has control of the project. This actually deals with project management. And so we actually moved our efforts to the Schema Business School in Lille, France, where we have multiple different researches on project management and how project management can integrate this into what they're currently doing. Of course, there's books, there's all sorts of things that we do that you can get a hold of for free if you want more information. Here's some of the information. There's some books that we have out. These are written actually by Dr. Dean Kashiwagi. He does have the same last name because he is my father. So I've been working with him. I went and taught at Arizona State University because I wanted to work with him. Mainly because I'm trying to utilize his expertise so I don't have to go through all the years of learning that he went through. But he wrote some books. Joseph is my brother. He does all the coordination. So a lot of you might be asking questions, well, how do I do this? Where do I start? If you contact Joseph, he can schedule a time. We love to help people. If you really need a lot of work done, then it is at a cost. But there are many times if we see a good win situation, you're willing to share the information on your project, that we will help you at minimal cost to be able to implement this and share your results with how much money it has saved you and how much the impact it has on the value of your projects. And I think that's it.
Thanks for watching. To see the rest of this presentation or more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon below. Leave us a comment if you have any questions or you have any topics you'd like us to explore in the future. Thanks, and we'll see you around.